this new talk. Today we are talking on how to measure weather to identify user behavior. This is essentially a talk about how to handle a problematic, how to fix a customer questions issue with plugins. So we are talking about plugin development. We are not talking always about code. We are talking about how to solve the problem. Okay, let's start. Firstly, I will introduce myself, and then we will talk about customer needs, the different approach that we can handle to solve the problem. Then we are talking about, obviously, the plugin development, then how that plugin has several parts, like it's a plugin part on the Matomo instance, but there is also a connector you have to deploy on your websites. And then how we can manage with the tag manager, and then obviously how we can analyze the collected data right in your Matomo interface. So firstly, introducing myself, my name is Ronan Hello. I'm founder of OpenMOS, which is a service company about Matomo services. I'm a full-time consultant in Matomo and trainer, and I create several plugin themes that are available on the marketplace. I create some documentation tools, many things that's turning about Matomo ecosystems. Okay, let's start with customer needs. During a mission, customer tell me that with his e-commerce website that's selling outdoor products, he have an insight. He know that he sell more during the summer and spring, but he can't quantify that value. So he just know that when it's shiny, it's summertime, his e-commerce works well. But we can't have data actually yet, and he can't prove me that it's only when it's shiny, and he can't value how much the sun and how much the weather have an impact on the sales of his e-commerce websites. He's obviously not alone with that issue, with that problematic. So I've listed some of them. So maybe if you are like a sports website owner, if you have like sports activities and some people are registering to your sports room with the website, you want to know how traffic works. For kids and family activities, cultural outings, many stuff like outdoor activities. But as the weather impact outdoor activities, it also impacts negatively or in the good way indoor activities. Like if it's very bright shine outside, you may not go to the cinema, but if it's rainy outside, you may have to go to the cinema. So it impacts in the both way, outdoor and indoor activities. It also impacts travel and tourism, and I know that you may have think of other sectors of activity of different industries, and yes, of course, it impacts many people. So we have to answer that question, and we have several questions in a row, like how does the weather change visitor behavior? Did my website see more conversion on sunny or rainy days? How can I avoid low traffic when the weather is expected to change? And what is the difference in traffic between rainy and sunny days? They are like typical questions, and let's see how we can handle that question. There are different possible approaches. The first things we have to do is to know a way, so to have a way to collect weather data for every customer. So like every customer are all around the world or all around the country or the region, we have to know what the weather for every visitors. How can we do that? Firstly, we have to choose a weather provider, a provider within an API. So there are several weather API available on the market, and we want an API with the largest amount of data for free, because we want that plugin to be free and to work with everybody and without limitations or long-term limitations. We want a free API with low configuration, so the user should just have to set their API key and it runs out of the box. We want an API that works using the IP address instead of providing a city name or a zip code. So I tested up many weather API, every API I test asks me for a city name, a country name, or a zip code. We don't want to provide that information because it will be very hard to provide. It will request more data to provide and get information. We want maybe less accurate weather information, but we want it automatically based on the API. Why the API? Because everybody got the API. The API can sort of telling us a large location of the user, and that large location is still accurate for us for that project. So we want an API based on the IP address of every visitors. And to handle multiple language and multiple units in the interface and in Matomo, the plugin should work in every languages or a large amount of languages. Okay, here there are 4 APIs, and everybody told me to start with OpenWeather, but OpenWeather is a very good one. But I started coding that plugin with Weather API, the green one, as you can see here, because it has low limitations. So you can perform like many requests before it started to be premium. The output response have many data, and it works with an API, and you can provide a language. So the API can speak in French, in English, in Spanish, in Danish, in any languages you want that's supported by the API, which checked all our checklists. Okay, if we are starting by building a plugin, it won't work with Matomo Cloud. So we have different environment here. We have Matomo Cloud-based user and Matomo on-premise users. If you are Matomo Cloud, as you can't install plugins, the only way you have to collect weather information is by creating custom dimensions in the scope of visits. You have to create every dimensions for every response you want to handle, like temperature, wind speed, air pressure, visibility, clouds, etc., etc. It works, but it's like not very easy. And depending of the plan you have on Matomo Cloud, it can block many slots available for your custom dimensions, which is not a very good way. So I don't want to go that way, because if we create custom dimensions, you can't replicate that configuration for new customers. You have to do the same stuff every time you want to deploy that kind of feature. So my choice is to create a brand new plugins that can create new dimensions to the database and provide a smooth UI where you just have to paste your API key and that runs out of the box. So let's see how we can create a plugin. So we will not deep dive into the code, okay? We will just see how a plugin works in large lines in 6 steps. The first thing you have to do, as you can see, is you have to generate a plugin structure using the Matomo developer mode. To create a plugin structure, you just have to turn your local Matomo installation into development mode using the PHP console development.enable command line. And then you can execute a new command line, which is PHP console generate plugin. Then the command prompt asks you for plugin name, plugin description, plugin version, etc., etc. Just enter, and it's generating and scaffolding a brand new plugins. What do we found in a plugin structure by default? Here is the plugin name. There is like a config folder that doesn't matter for us at a time. So here we don't have to write in config.php. We don't have to write in trackers.php. Then we have a folder that containing documentations that's only useful for the marketplace. That's how you write new pages on the marketplace. So here is the FAQ, and here is the description pages. Then there is a folder where we can store the screenshots that we have taken from the UI that allow users to preview the plugin before installing it, which is very good for marketing, very good for user engagement. And then we have a changelog file where you can write every changes you made, every release you provide. A plugin.json, which is the core main file where the plugin versions, plugin name, plugin description, etc., etc. A README file just for you, and a weather.php file, which is our starter point when you want to write the PHP configuration. Okay, we have our starter plugin structure. Now we have to keep in mind that we want to create new dimensions for the weather data. We want to create all the dimensions that we need. Okay, we want to store speed, wind speed, temperature, dew point, I don't know, sunny or rainy, the weather conditions, cloud, occupation of the space. Okay, we want to store many data. One thing I do, so I made a first call to the API. The API give me a response, and I show in that list of data that the API provide me what kind of data will be useful for me. And based on that response of the API, I create the missing dimensions right in Matomo. To create dimensions, no code. You don't have to read the code that on the side. You just have to write PHP console generate dimensions. This will provide you a single file that in a row create the database, handles dimensions, support segments, all in one file. So you don't have to code as many as you expected at default. So here, the class, you have to change the name. So here I just said temperature. The column name, which is the value of the column name in the database. So here it's a visit scope dimensions. So we have to store data once per visit, not once per action, which is very different. Here we just store the data in the weather underscore temperature column in the data table. Then we have to define a type. What kind of temperature? Temperature is obviously a number, but temperature could be a decimal number. This is why we just set float to the column type. And obviously, in some country, there is no there is no weather chapter. So there are no weather insights. So in sometimes the weather API just send no response for some insights, for some value. So when you ask for temperature in a country that doesn't support the API, which could appear, you have to set a new value to the actual number. Then you just provide a singular name, a segment name that could be used through segment generator or through the API, and an accepted value, which is just a text that should be displayed in the UI. So here are 5 values you just have to set. Then I adapt the code that is generated here. So I didn't write this code, I just adapt the code. And here I just write weather temperature exactly as I've written here in column names. So I could maybe override this just by placing the protected, because it's protected, but I can maybe use directly here the variables. So as you can see, we have 2 similar or almost similar functions. Here is the on new visit function. So when data comes for the first time, it will be stored. How? We grab the information here. Here we just check if there is data. If there is no data, it goes out. It returns the exact value. So if it's like 17 degrees, okay, we store 17 degrees to the database. Then if it's empty, we store 0, like null in the database. Or like 0 is not exactly null, so it's like 0 as a value. And if we don't have anything, we just return null. Okay, this is for the new visit. But every time your user is changing the page, it have to trigger a new actions, and maybe it could send a new weather information. You have to know that we fixed that issue later in the code, but at this time, for the plugin development, Matomo asks you what you want to do when someone sends a new value for the same visit. So here we are just overriding the default value. But if the value have already been persisted to the database, we don't override it. So if there is new value arriving and nothing in the database, we store the fresh new value. If there is something in the database and there is new value arriving, we do not override the value, okay? Because we don't need to override the value, so the weather doesn't change as quick as any other things. Weather is like slow data, slow information, so we don't need to update the value every time something is coming to the database. Okay, now we have all the dimensions we need to make the plugin works as a starter point. Now we need to test the data storing of the custom dimensions we just created in our plugins. How can we test this? Firstly, I just want to be sure that the database have been updated to allow data to be stored in the right columns. Here, as you can see, I just open up a PHP MyAdmin, which is quite a bad tool, but very handful and very useful in a local environment. And here I'm just looking at a demo database, and I can see my columns for every dimensions we just created. Right. By default, it should be null, but here is a screenshot with populated data right in the database. And how can we test sending data at this point of developing the program? You just have to fake visits or to override current visits. When you hit a page in a Matomo, in a website that is tracked by Matomo, it will trigger a request to the Matomo instance, and that request is just a URL with parameters. If you want to test your custom dimensions, you just have to add to that URL the end, then the name of the column on the database, and a fake value. If you add this to the current URL, obviously Matomo will keep that value and store this in the database. And I tested it for every of my dimensions because some are floats, some are integers, and some are strings. So I have to test every of my dimensions to be sure that the database handles the right format. Okay. Here for visits dimensions, you can see that column right in the database in the Matomo log visit table. Okay, now we have dimensions working with storage working. We want to provide data all over the Matomo instance. To provide data from the database to reports, widgets, segments, and everything else, we have to build an internal API. Matomo lets you create a plugin API within few lines of code. Here, we are in the api.php file auto-generated in your plugins, and we have to create a function like this for every dimensions we generated. To make it more easy to maintain, I've just created a brand new function here, which is get data table with parameters. Check if you have the right access to view that data, and then it will process the archiving system. It will pick the archive in the database and provide some data, which is like default works of Matomo. Here, for every dimensions, I have to copy that functions and change temperature by every other dimension we need. And every time we trigger the get data table function, which is just here. So one time this, several times this, and you just have to adapt. The only things I've made here is to add a filter for some of the dimensions I have in my plugins to group data by floating. So I rounded floats value like 2.5, 2.7, 2.8. We don't need that accuracy. So I round all of the data to make it like match with 2 or 3, depending on the nearest integer. So here I'm just rounding all of the data that's been stored in the weather temperature reports. So it will group data, and you will have more readable reports. Every endpoint of the API will be available under a new endpoint generated with a prefix as plugin names dot function name. So here we are in weather reports plugins, and we want to access get temperature function. That's how API works. It works internal, and if you have an access token, out token in Matomo, you can access that API from any other services like third-party services, or maybe another internal plugins of Matomo. Okay, we have dimensions, we have tested dimensions, we have internal API. Maybe we just have to create reports. Now we have to create reports. Reports is just the data table that shows up the data that are stored in the database. Matomo has a specific system of archiving that we are just talking in the next slide, but we have firstly to create basic reports, and then we are adding like reporting process to that reports. To create a report in Matomo, you have a clear line of code, which is PHP console generates --reports. And for that reports, actually, you may have to init the reports, just set the default configuration, such as the name. And here we handle translation. So the plugin is available in English and in French. And if you ask me to make that plugin like German friendly, we can add German. And then we just say that, okay, these reports will handle a new dimension, which is the temperature dimensions, okay? This is the custom temperature dimensions we just built before. Then we add the documentation, which is still a string of text. Then the order, so it's the fourth reports in the page. Yes, that report handle goals metrics. That's very important for our case, for the customer's journey we imagine. And then we just add the subcategory to organize that report under a global weather page. And then here is how we configure the view. We handle a data table view, and then we just add a label based on the dimension name, and we enable searching. That's all. I cleaned up the page because PHP files are like much longer, but here is the only things you have to edit in order to create that plugin. Okay, now we are in a strange period because we have like Matomo v4, which is at the end of servicing, and we have like Matomo v5, which is in release candidate and will be released very, very soon. So we have to handle our actual customer and prepare the future with archiving system. Archiving system is slightly different in v4 and in v5. So for this plugin, I started by coding the v5 method because my local environment was on Matomo v5, but when I tested up on my own demo copy of the production Matomo instance, it's not working. So we have to roll back and then create the v4 archiving report system. To create the archiving report system, we just have to extend the archiver class, which is built in Matomo. And then I've created, like I reverse engineered many plugins of the Matomo instance. I see that every developer just defined constants as record name and dimensions. And then we just have to create in that plugin this aggregate by dimensions. So here is my temperature, which called that function. We call that functions. And that function here is just running the importer process using that function. It seems complicated, but you have to copy and paste every time that line and that function, and it will work for all of your dimensions. Then we are looking for the v5, which is a good thing. So v4 is like archaic system. v5 is very different, but works very, very the best way we can imagine. So here we have a single file per dimensions, which is not the case in the v5. In the v4, the v4, all the dimensions have to be stored there. In the v5, you have one file per dimensions. And here we have the constructor that set different default value. You have to make a recorder that creates the archive based on, you see archiver temperature record name, so the default record, and then the archiver. And here we can add different metrics we want to process in the reports. That's all. And at the end, we just say that we want to have data only if the value is longer than 0. So if we have a value, we want the value. If we don't have the value, we just want a placeholder value or nothing. So now we have our backend plugin system working. Okay, we have an API, dimensions, database, reporting, archiving system. All is working, but we don't have any code to send the data through that plugins and store it to the database. So now we are looking how we can grab the weather information on websites and then sending through maybe HTTP tracking API through the plugins to store it on the database and get weather data available on the Matomo instance. So here is a custom code I totally wrote. That code is based on the extend tracker method. So it's just a JavaScript file we have to generate. You have to write your own functions, and that will result into pack.push set weather function with lots of parameters. Okay, when you handle new functionality into Matomo, you always have to set underscore pack.push and then the name of the function, the name of the plugin, sorry, dot the name of the function. So here is the function. What did we do? We just have many parameters passing through the functions. And what we are doing here is just we are adding every value to the HTTP request of the tracker. One thing we just do in that plugins is we add a ping equals 1, because if we don't add that line, every time you push a new weather value to the Matomo instance, it will be recognized as a new page view, and we want to have duplicates page view, so we just add ping is equal to 1, and the data will just go to the page view, store in the database, but don't change anything. Every time we have to make an update on that file, Matomo have to recompile the GS file. In order to make this possible, you just have to type in your terminal PHP console custom-matomo-gs double dots update, and it will re-render the tracker.gs file. Okay, this is how we send data to the Matomo, but how do we provide weather informations into that functions? Let's see. There are different ways of getting data from the API. That API requires IP address of the user in order to locate the user and to provide weather informations. Here, we want to get the IP address. To get the IP address, there are many ways. If you are on a PHP server, you can use the functions called PHP $_server remote address. This will give you the IP address of the user. But if the user is behind a proxy server, it will give you the IP address of the proxy server, which is basically VPN stuff. That's if you are using a PHP server. I do not recommend that way of doing it because you are depending on the server that runs Matomo, and we don't want that. We want to do that plugin works only in JavaScript. So here I use that method. You just have to fetch an API from the web browser of the users, and that API is just returning that object, okay? Every new users fetch an external API, and that API is just providing the IP address of the user. Yes, I know I could have code that right in the plugin, like just opening an endpoint to the outside and say that every time you just ping the API, it will just return the IP address. Maybe it should be on the V2 of that plugin, but actually for the test, for the demo, I'm calling outside to an external API. And here is the response. So I just hide the values, but I've got an IP, a network mask, and a version of the IP, etc., which is what we want to get. We only want the IP address. Okay, we've got the IP. Then we have to implement the hard way all the stuff we've built on the website of the customer. So I know that's very much of code, but here is a simple copy and paste. You have to copy that code and paste it on the website. So what does that code do? Here we have a calling functions. That functions just stop there. And here we are just providing some information such as the API key of the weather API provider. Then just provide the language you want to get the information for. Like, would like the API to answer you in French, in English, in German, or stuff like that. All language are available in the documentation. Here, here we just make a filter to prevent duplicates data from the API. So we don't want to call multiple times the API per user. We want to call it once per visit. What we do here is just storing the weather information in a local storage on your web browser. That local storage allows us to directly know that the user already have fetched weather information. So if the local storage, the session storage is filled with weather data, we do not provide a new fetch to the weather API. We already have the data. It prevents bad performance. So that's a great thing. Then we just ask for the user IP address. Okay, we've got the IP address. And then once we have the IP address, we fetch weather data. We fetch weather data with the API key, the address, the IP address, and the language you just choose. We wait for the response, and then we just exploit. We just have the weather data in a weather constant. And we just have to paste weather objects and every data we want to grab within the pack.push function weather reports.setWeather. Here is like documentation, so you can edit values, like here the visibility in kilometers, but if you want to edit this and get the value in miles, you can obviously edit kilometers here and replace it with the word miles, and you would get miles in that function. Okay, here is the hard way of setting up the weather data on your website. You can manage, as I just told you, many units. You want to manage like Fahrenheit or Celsius degrees, inch or millimeters, miles or kilometers, and kilometers per hours. So that allows us to collect data all over the world, and that make that plugin available for everybody. But this is like the hard way. If everybody have to copy and paste that code, it will be a little bit scary. So we provided a better solution, which is the tag manager solution. In Matomo plugin development, we can create custom tag, and that's what we did. We create a custom new weather tag with using the PHP console generate double dots tag manager dash tag console line, which add to your plugins a template of a tag manager tag. And here what we found in the tag. In the tag, you just have to set the name, the description, help, like hints, just string, obviously. The category, so here the category is a company name, and then just provide an icon, which is a cloudy and the sun, just a tiny icon, and then the parameters you want to provide to the user. So here, I just set one parameter, like temperature unit by default is the value C, but it will be a select in the UI, and you can choose between Celsius and Fahrenheit value. So here is the value that will be stored in the database, and here is the translation string that will be translated in your own languages. That's quite easy. So the only things we have to change is the category and the icon, and providing some controls that are already generated in the templates tags, but you have to edit the controls. And then we have to make the JavaScript part of that tag. So here is like backend tags, like PHP tag, the UI in the tag manager. And here is like the working part, JavaScript part of the tag. The JavaScript part of the tag is obviously the same thing as the code we pasted the hard way. But here you don't have to do anything. I already did it for you, and it's working as well in the tag. So it's obviously the same thing, but all the constant we had in the latest script have been replaced by parameters.get. In that way, we can grab your own configuration from the Matomo database in order to get the API key, the languages, temperature units, precipitation units, etc. So we get all the variables here, and we pass it through the pack.push function as we did before. With that way working, you just have to go in your tag manager backend and create a brand new tag. The brand new tag will appear as a weather tag within the OpenMOS category. By hitting that button, you will enter the tag configuration. And as you can see, you have a clear UI when you just have to provide a weather API key. You just have to select a language between all the language provided by the API, and you can obviously here provide different units. Obviously, it's always a select UI control because you can't enter raw data. It's only between options that have been provided by the weather API. And here we are able in few seconds, just by hitting an API key here, to get weather data. Okay, now we have a complete setup of how we can call an API, get the IP address of the user, sending that API address to a weather API provider, getting the weather information, sending it to the plugin in the Matomo instance, storing data in the database, process the data using archiving system, and then providing clear reports in the UI. So now is the fun part. You just have to analyze the data you've collected for weeks. Okay, now in the Matomo instance, you have under visitor menu the weather page. In that page, we have like all the reports we've created with custom dimensions, with plugin dimensions. If we have chosen the way of creating custom dimensions instead of creating a plugins, we will have many menu here, one per custom dimensions. And in every page, we only have one reports. So creating a plugins allow you to have several dimensions right in the same page, which is very cool. So here in weather, we can grab conditions, cloud, pressure, temperature, felt temperature, precipitation, UV, humidity. If you scroll down, we will have like wind speed, wind direction, etc. This will be very useful for everybody. And with that reports, with that dimensions we had, I thought that there is a question. Great, I would really like to use this with some tourism customer question about sending APRs to the weather API. This is based with GDPR. Actually, we don't know, but it's like browser parts, so it's not in the Matomo database. We do not grab that APRs, but weather API, if that weather API does not match your needs, you can obviously change with using the hard way, not the tag manager, but using the hard way, you can change the weather API. Do I need prior consent from the visitor to get weather data? Probably yes, right? Here, I think yes, because when I throw that plugin into the customer's website, it's under the GDPR consent. So that's not a question I had, because my customers always are a GDPR compliance with the cookie banner. So maybe we have to test. But I don't think that weather is like personal data, but it's based on the location. So I have to dig that question. This is not the legal part, is really not my best part of the development for that plugins. And can I only use the weather function if I have the visitor's consent, probably using the tag function or using the tag depending on the consent? Yes, if you have obviously configured any CMP consent manager platform on your website, you just have to trigger that tag using data layer events, like if you are using Acceptio maybe or something like that. Acceptio is pushing to the database, to the data layer, an event called accept consent cookie underscore provider or vendor, something like that. You just have to hear for that event in the data layer and then trigger the tag at the right moment. So if it's like normal tag in tag management, so you can trigger it whenever you want. And when you want to deploy the code the right way, the hard way, using pure JavaScript, yes, it's a function. So you just have to trigger the functions once you get the consent. I saw that Rona have a question. What are your personal plans for new plugins? For new plugins in Matomo here, it would be a hybrid between theme and plugins, such as plugins that allow you to edit every main components in the UI, like buttons, cards, header, menu, and you can just change color size, font size, paddings, stuff like that. That will be great. And have other plugins ID, such as continue tag manager extending plugins by adding more tags. I had good information about triggering live alerts, which could be quite easy, providing an API key from a notification system, and just trigger as you triggered an event to the database, but you can trigger any push notifications to your phone, to a messaging system like Slack or Element or not everything. You can just push via API using tag manager tag. That could be a very good way of doing it. A gold threshold for database, not really. What do you talk? Can you provide me some more information about your questions? How could Matomo help you contribute more? The main problem I encounter while developing plugins is that the documentation is not filled. It's not like the documentation is very, very empty at sometimes. So we need more information. We need more concrete, not concrete, but not more real examples. And we have to dig into how Matomo works. So for creating a plugin like that, we have to read many other plugins created by the community to read and learn how they did this, because the documentation can't handle that. How could you help your Matomo barometer plugins? Yes, obviously, or now we can work together to create a barometer plugins for the database and gold threshold, as you write in the chat, and maybe will be available next time for creating this plugin. It will be a good idea. I saw that Valentin Barres told new question. What about indexion impact? Does your plugin create overload from server perspective? Actually, no. It's really there is no issue with overload, because we override the main Matomo call. So it's like heavy as a custom events. So when you trigger custom events, it just calls the database, paste the value in the database, and weather reports work the same way. And it just generates obviously more and more data in the database, and we have to process more reports. So which maybe is your question at the base. And archiving report system works with weather reports the same way as if you did it with custom dimensions. So it's overload the system the same way as if you create like 7 custom dimensions. It's obviously the same. Then now we have our reports working, dimensions working, and obviously we have segments working. So you can create segments in the UI using every dimensions you've had. So since the beginning, we have chosen that we use the temperature dimension. So you can just search for temperature under visitors, and you just have the temperature dimensions right here. Just select an operator and then define a value like temperature above 20 degrees. Save and apply, and you will have only the visits where the visitors live in a country that at the moment of the visit, it will be warmer than 20 degrees. If you want to work with the API, you just have to add and weather underscore temperature superior or bigger and equals to 2050, the value you want to provide, in order to make the API works with segments. There is no other way interacting with the data. Something is missing actually in this plugin, that you can't bring weather reports to the dashboard. So I have to create widgets. I will create widgets. It's quite easy using a generator, but it's very simple. I have to do that maybe in the next release. And one of the last things I want to talk with you is that in the visits log, if you have visits log enabled in your Matomo interface, we're using 2 files, visitordetails.php, which is the file you have in front of us here. We just map every data from the visitor profile to the visitor profile from the database. And then we render that data in a brand new view. So here is a visitordetails.twig, which is a view renderer of Matomo. And we add for every card in the visitor logs interface, we add weather menu with every conditions and every data we grab from the API. So every data you have that kind of value. So maybe it's time for me to show you quickly in the interface how we can do this, but we are almost done with that data. I will show you in the demo instance. I've built it up for the conference. Here it's great. And then here we just have to go to visitors and then weather, pick a date in the past, because I don't have any data right there. So maybe I don't have data on that instance. I have to change instance right there. And here we are. Okay, here we are. We have instance right there. And as you can see, here we have like all the conditions the API is returning us, the data, the clouds, and for every report, we can switch between simple table, engagement, or goal metrics. So if you are an e-commerce, you just go to goal metrics and you will have all your goals right here, which is very, very good. You can perform a search here that will filter between all the labels that are displayed here. You can create segments as we see. And in the tag manager, we can just go to creating a new tags. And in the tags list that we have to look for weather tag here. And if you click on weather, you just have to provide your API key, select language between all the languages that have been supported by the API. And as I told you, you can switch between every units that is provided by the customers. And just by publishing a new container, it will work perfectly, and you will have weather information. So we did it. We have a plugins that could be installed from the marketplace within a click. And then you have to create an account on Weather API interface, grab your API key, paste it on the tag manager container, and publish a new container, which take almost 3 or 5 minutes, maybe, and you will start collecting weather information using that plugins. So it's a way of how we can respond to the customer's needs at the beginning with building a plugin that will help the community and maybe help many people later by answering one customer's question. So now we are able to know that his e-commerce website sells when the weather come warmer than 24 degrees. We know that he sells more stuffs or more items when the weather comes to sunny and by the day, and etc. etc. So we have very, very good information, and we can talk about units, we can talk about metrics and real value instead of knowing stuff, because when you open the door, it's rainy outside, and you say, okay, it's rainy. Yes, it's rainy at your home, but not in your all customers' home, and that's why. So thank you for being watching that talk. If you have question, I will stay in the chat for minutes after that talk to answer all the questions. And if you have right now questions, I can answer it live. But thank you for all. The plugin is for free and available on the marketplace. So don't hesitate to test it up and to make feedbacks if you found any bugs. I guess there is no bugs, but still maybe remaining some. And don't hesitate to contribute to that plugins. Thank you.